The bag you bring it out, honestly. I might just like shuffle away.
You just won't eat it.
Yeah. Depends on how the speech goes. Really dark.
She's only mildly allergic.
Peanut butter.
I welcome up the first speaker of the Affirmative team to open up today's meeting.
Shocker, my notes is actually organised. Okay. Oh. Having the people from your own country protesting because you use all their money and cannot provide them with financial securities, all because of the efficiency model, seems like something no country should be aiming for. Okay, what I'll be doing for you in my speech today. First, a note on setup, and then I will be discussing my first point, which will be a comparative point about what efficiency-oriented economic policy looks like during economic shock versus what our policy looks like during the event of economic shock. And then my second point will be on how our side allows for future-proofing. And Theo's point will be on the likelihood of economic shock actually occurring. Okay, just a note on setup. Who are the main beneficiaries of either systems? Okay, for the efficiency system, we believe that these are going to be like upper class business people or owners of like major businesses and corporations, particularly exporters, just due to what the info slide informed us. Whereas under our side, the main beneficiary of our system are likely going to be your smaller actors, like your lower class citizens or those of lower incomes. And these are also going to likely be small businesses, right? Okay, on to my first point, which is the comparative one. I'm not going to reread that title. Okay, for context, we're constantly at the risk of economic shock, which will be obviously Theo's split point. Especially within like the next 5 years, is a very realistic risk for us to be running, right? We saw this with COVID-19. This absolutely caught the entire world off guard with just how like insane and like with how crazy these impacts were, right? This can also happen in like the event of war, especially with a country that's a major exporter, or in like natural disasters. For example, Cyclone Gabriel last year, or Christchurch in 2011. Okay. So in the event of an economic disaster, in the event of disaster which affects the economy, here are some main sort of harms that would happen on their side of the house. Okay. In their worst case scenario, businesses are going to be shutting down. This is for various reasons, right? If we're in a worse economy, there's likely going to be less spending because people have less money, and people can't actually be shopping at those businesses, right? And the business might not be able to open for a variety of reasons, like government mandates, which we saw during COVID-19, or in the event of a natural disaster, they actually are physically incapable of opening due to, say, like needing physical repairs, or I don't know, maybe the streets like blocked off. This obviously results in these businesses not actually receiving an income, and they like don't have the ability to fund rebuilds. So why is this harmful on their side of the house? Well, because if the government has smaller reserves, they have less money to actually be spending on like assisting these businesses in like reopening, or assisting these businesses in the event of economic shock, right, and economic hardships. Whereas under our side, the government's going to have more money, more funding to go into these businesses to support them. Specifically, I want the focus to be on like your smaller businesses, because these things likely don't affect major businesses maybe to such an extreme, but they definitely do harm small businesses a lot. And we need this to be weighed very highly in debates, because in today's debate, because that's actually ultimately how you regrow an economy, right? Is through these smaller businesses actually coming up. So under their side, if we're not supporting these small businesses, we're not actually helping with even more future economic growth. Okay, so how does this cause more economic strain, right? The government's money isn't unlimited. Yet again, during the event of economic shock, these businesses are going to want to be borrowing or lending, right? And the government, which in New Zealand we do have a great beneficiary system, but I want to reiterate, the government's money is not unlimited, so they'll be lending or borrowing money from other countries, right? And if it's a global shock, for example, war, other countries might not want to share this money. So if we don't actually have it in our back pocket, the government's unable to actually support these
Point of information.
people. Okay, onto impacts. Businesses would be shutting down, or at the very best for side negating, there would be redundancies or job losses in these businesses, right? Which, yet again, this causes more strain on the government's benefit system because job losses mean these people aren't actually getting any money. So they need to actually be on the benefit system. This will be costing more and harmful to the New Zealand government because they're already stretched thin due to the economic hardships. Whereas our side what would our side look like in the event of an economic shock? Well, the government would actually have the funds to help keep businesses afloat, or at least individuals. This is because they can actually offer more subsidies to especially those smaller businesses so that they can keep employees, or so that they would have less redundancies. So yet again, being very generous, our very worst case is we're simply going to just have less people losing jobs, right? So that means less people have to go on the benefit system. Or at the very least, we would have more support for these individuals. Okay, I'll take POI.
If you take it, I'll take it.
Does economic resiliency not look larger than just the scale of the New Zealand government's budget?
I guess, but New Zealand's pretty reliant on our beneficiary system and our social support system. So when we face economic hardships, that's the government, especially government funding, is where businesses look to first for support and for help. So, yeah. Okay, now onto my point of future-proofing. Okay, well, like I said, the government will be helping businesses, small businesses grow in the event of economic hardship, whereas under their side of the house, they're only going to be helping your major or your bigger companies and bigger businesses growing, because these are, most of your small businesses aren't major exporters, which are who are going to be affected by less sort of strict laws around exporting and stuff. And your small businesses aren't hugely involved in this. So what is this? Oh yeah. So yeah, in the event of economic shock, your side's only going to be helping the wealthy people who are already in an okay position, whereas we're actually helping, whereas we're actually helping your smaller actors and less wealthy individuals. What are the impacts of this? People will feel more secure in the country's ability to actually help them during the event of economic hardships. And what happens if people don't feel secure in the event of an economic hardship? Well, we have things like protests and stuff that occur, which generally can cause a bit of unrest in society, which can then impact on the government. Okay, stand side affirming.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I now welcome up the first speaker for the meeting team.
I'm just going to turn that on silent. I did not realise it was on sound.
The highway to hell is paved with good intentions. And while we believe the other team has good intentions, they're sending us on a fast track to a very bad place. I'd like to start off with a small amount of rebuttal to their case before moving on to our main point, which kind of gets split into two: the positive benefits of an efficiency policy and the way that a resiliency policy is not going to work. So moving on to some rebuttal. First of all, COVID-19. I'm so glad they brought that up. Whatever side you were on in COVID-19, it didn't help. The reason that businesses crashed is not that because of a certain policy. The reason they crashed was, for instance, if you were tourism, there were no tourists coming into the country, and so you couldn't work. And whether there was resiliency or not, you were going to fail. In fact, efficiency worked better, and I'll explain why later, because the government actually had money to spend rather than blowing it all on this efficiency policy. Also, where were you going? So they said that when you go on to economic shock and businesses are having to shut down because there's less people spending money, the government can get involved with their government spending. The government won't have any money left for government spending because resiliency involves a large amount of government spending in order to try and keep the market the way the government wants. So this actually creates economic shock because it's going to, in the long run, create inflation, which is I'm going to get into later. And yeah, they also said something that people are going to complain because the government used all of their money in the efficiency policy. Actually, the government uses more money in the resiliency policy. So from that, I'm just going to mention our path to victory, then I'd better move on to explaining why on earth the resiliency policy involves more government spending. So, our path to victory is basically showing that the small short-term benefits of resiliency are outweighed and actually mirrored by the efficiency policy. So, resiliency, basically, and it's an attempt to freeze things the way the government wants and keep it the same forever when the inevitable is going to happen. It's almost like a shortcut. The government goes, oh, actually, it would be good if this was that price, and then decides, right, well, we're going to make it that price. And shortcuts, as we know, usually end up being long cuts and not working. For instance, I'd like to bring up the example of Robert Muldoon's 1970s government. They decided that wool needs to be more expensive, and so they decided, okay, well, we're going to raise the price on it. As it happened, too much wool ended up being produced, and the government ended up having to buy all this wool back, and they're like, got a ton of wool, what do we do with it? And it completely failed. And besides, how does the government decide what they want to protect? Lobbying, corruption, and interests of who to protect are all factors in this. Big corporations might lobby the government and decide, oh, okay, we want this to be protected because this is in our interests. And corruption within the government, different people have got different ideas as to what exactly would work for them. And with the resiliency policy, it's only the special interests of a few that the government can protect. There's always going to be problems for someone. Which I will go further in our efficiency policy into saying how this actually works for everyone because of the flowing nature of it. Okay, resiliency policy, basically what it's doing is creating an artificial market. This is only going to work for a short period of time because it involves a large amount of government spending to keep it the way it is. It's a bit like, I don't know, trying to balance something on a seesaw. It involves a lot of effort of keeping it just so, and the government can't stand there forever holding it because the government is going to have to spend money to keep it like that. And where's the government going to get this money from? Increasing taxes. This takes money away from people, and when people have less money, they can't afford the things that are important. They can't afford healthcare, they can't afford education, they can't afford the basic necessities which humans need, all because the government is going, okay, let's keep all that price, it'll be a good idea. This also means that higher government spending is going to lead to inflation because you're putting more pressure on the country's resources because people are paying more taxes. Therefore, people are having to raise the price of things to try and get enough money. And inflation, as we know, is the rising price of things in society. Oh, guess what? We're taking more money off people. This is brilliant. Sorry, just trying to read this. finally, the price that something's kept at is likely to be wrong. The government can't get it right. So the resiliency policy is absolutely flawed. No, I'm running out of time. Going on to the positive benefits of an efficiency policy. An efficiency policy allows the market to naturally correct itself. This policy allows for short-term cycles in the market, and these short-term cycles are going to involve raising and lowering ebbs and flows. And we're going to preview that these ebbs and flows are completely necessary for a thriving economy. Efficiency favours the best thing possible for a job. This is called comparative advantage of assured. So, for instance, Ecuador produces bananas. No, it produces them better than New Zealand. Therefore, under our policy, Ecuador is going to produce bananas. And this is good for Ecuador because Ecuador can produce bananas easily and make money of this. New Zealand's not going to bother producing bananas because they're not going to grow and they're going to cost a lot of money to grow. No, so New Zealand has spared the cost of trying to make bananas grow. They can just import it off Ecuador, and that's what happens under our model, rather than the government deciding, oh, okay, you know, just in case Ecuador has an earthquake, we're going to start growing bananas because bananas are an important thing to protect. So basically, under our side of the house, everybody is going to win because we're not in the fiddly process of growing bananas. And also, this is going to fully maximise the profitability of the producer. They can sell their item at a relative price, which gets them profit and also earns them enough to cover costs of growing it, and etc. This means there's better competition. Competitors can afford to lower their prices so that more people will want to buy it. And other companies will go, hang on a minute, I'm going to lower my prices too now. And there's going to be competition in the market. I'll go on to a little bit later. This is perfect competition, which is going to encourage our economy even more, because it encourages good prices, because people keep on wanting to drop it. Enterprises, people go, oh, okay, I need to work harder to beat these prices, and innovation, because people think, oh, I'm going to work smarter, not harder. And this competition is going to improve the welfare of the customer. Prices are at the optimum price for them to buy it, and companies keep on wanting to make it cheaper. Okay, so completely polarised from that side of the house, consumers now have more money because they're having to spend less on other things. So consumers can spend more money on good stuff, healthcare, education. We have a healthier society because people can actually afford what they need. We have a better social society because people can afford what they need. They can afford to hang out, have fun, go to the gym, I don't know, all these things that people want to do. So yeah, the competition is better in this case because prices are at the right price, because there's no restrictions that hinder them at all, and this also allows new competitors onto the market. I'm sure my second speaker will have more to say, but I'm proud to stand.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I now welcome up the second speaker of the affirmative.
You can go. We need to finish that off. I'll also just take a 4 seconds to set up my notes.
To begin, I'd like to start with some rebuttal about the example of COVID, the protections of resilience, Ecuadorian bananas, and about the likelihood of disaster, before moving on to my point about the likelihood of economic shock due to disaster. Just to clarify, COVID was an example. Take Christchurch. We didn't have enough to rebuild and had to get aid from foreign countries. And aid will not come from something that is affecting those countries, a global issue, such as war, global recession, our current cost of living crisis, and COVID we didn't get any aid for. Additionally, moving on to
my next rebuttal. Resilience ensures that people are protected, and a $10 tax increase would give the government $50 million to help these people who are struggling. And we believe that a slight tax increase can't be weighed higher than potentially saving lives in a worst case scenario. Additionally, while it is definitely a side point, growing bananas here in New Zealand would benefit our farmers, many of whom do actually try to grow bananas, and it lowers the cost of import, which could be good in the case of, say, supply lines being blocked and ships not being able to leave either our ports or their ports. And while bananas are a small example, this isn't about bananas. It is about medical equipment, manufacturing equipment, life-saving medicines that if we cannot get our hands on, we will be absolutely screwed. And we will see many deaths in our country. Additionally, their case relies entirely on there being no disaster in which it is necessary for there to be additional government support for our most vulnerable communities here in New Zealand, which brings me neatly to my substantive point about the likelihood of economic shock. There is a high likelihood of economic shocks in the next 5 years from a wide variety of angles, such as the escalation of the war in Palestine, global warming and rising sea levels, the cost of living crisis worsening, supply chains failing, natural disaster, which New Zealand is particularly susceptible to in the case of earthquakes, tsunamis, cyclones, and this isn't including any far-fetched or unpredictable events, which are frequent in a world as unpredictable as ours. Nobody could have predicted COVID and the long-term effects that would have on the global economy and our economy specifically. And these are all pressing issues which can pop up at any moment, and all of these will have significant negative impacts on our economy. And again, any one of these could cause massive economic shock, which we need to be insulated against. Under negating, we see businesses closing, job loss, and our economy going into recession as people are laid off and they have less money to spend. And this will result in a worse living situation for the majority of working class New Zealanders and New Zealanders in general, as people are forced to choose between dinner and rent. Under our side, we will be able to keep New Zealanders fed and sheltered, keep our small New Zealand businesses afloat, keep employees, keep our economy running, rebuild from natural disasters, and recover quickly if everything goes to hell in a handbasket. This will happen, and we need to be prepared for it. You don't plan for the ride, but the crash. I will take a POI now.
Your model has been about the basis of resiliency. How are things such as government payouts and like beneficiaries and subsidization, how is that actually improving the resiliency of production in New Zealand?
Oh, well, for most economic shocks, the most important thing is to get ahead of long-term impacts. And so by quickly moving to help, what's the word? Sorry, I can't think of it actually. But by quickly moving to help pay out like working class people, you enable them to keep their houses, keep their food on their table, keep their families going, so that the moment things recover, they can immediately go back to their jobs. And the moment their businesses work, they're able to go back because they're not pushed down this path of debt and poverty, which people can very easily fall into in the case of an extreme economic shock. And so it helps keep, resiliency means that we're able to bounce back quickly from economic shocks, which is good because it means that we're able to have a stronger economy in general. Should we measure the strength of our economy based purely on how we don't have to grow bananas because we're able to import them,
POI.
or because in the case of a terrible situation, we don't have New Zealanders who are starving. We don't see massive spikes of homelessness, and we're quickly able to get back on track for our nation. I will take another POI.
On the point of bananas, we were simply using that because it shows that we're not the best people to grow bananas. What is your take on that?
My take on that is that I agree, and I actually didn't mean to say bananas. They were just on my mind. Please pretend that I instead said medicine and medical equipment, which I think we can all agree
Yes, apologies, we're all
should have been used in the first place. And henceforth, bananas did actually mean medical equipment and medicine, and I think we can all agree to that. Thank you. This is why we stand for working class people in New Zealand.
Thank the speakers for their speech, and I welcome up the second speaker for the meeting.
Perfect. So it is clear to us today that the strong case regarding the affirming side is around this likelihood of getting this sort of like efficiency model coming in. It's this likelihood of these huge natural disasters they're talking about. It's this likability of this sort of huge COVID-19 pandemics that are like going to come through and absolutely disrupt our economy. However, what needs to be truly noted here is this is how economic cycles work. It is the true principles of how economics works, is it ebbs and flows as society changes by simply trying to put a barrier, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit about how the barrier isn't actually as effective as they might believe it is, and kind of come back on that. I just want to talk about like the selectability of the case here. Just that's going to be my main substantive that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I just first want to touch on your point regarding like this true kind of model, because technically you're not actually talking about how you're going to genuinely improve this kind of selectability instead of like doing it that way. Also, the benefits that Natalie kind of talked about was like with regards of like the huge positive benefits that we see with an efficiency policy. We see things on both sides of the house, like it helps people get out of poverty, it helps people with healthcare, medicine, and all of those sorts of positive outcomes that we see. Now this happens on both sides of the house regardless and is symmetrical, therefore that point is almost irrelevant in this debate. So that leaves us with the only other point, and that is literally about the impact and likelihood of a disaster occurring, which simply put, we do not know when a disaster is going to come. However, how can we future-proof our economy? Let's take the 2019-2020 kind of pandemic as an example, right? Living in a tourist town, tourism was absolutely thriving in 2019. It was going on an absolute boom-bust sort of economic cycle, right? 2019, it was shooting right sky high. We were getting heaps of visitors coming in, and then all of a sudden COVID hit. And what did we see? An absolute huge decline in tourism numbers. We saw an absolute huge decline in the amount of money that was coming into the region. And what did we receive? We received government payouts and government subsidies, which incredibly helped us in this situation. However, let's take a step back. What would have happened if these subsidies and sort of like economic incentives had been offered before the pandemic had hit? Say let's take it a step back and put it like we were doing it in 2018. What would have happened then? Well, we know that this kind of selectability kind of model with regards to putting out payouts doesn't work. Natalie referred to the model under the Robert Muldoon sort of government back in the 70s with regards to wool prices. And this is actually quite a key point to put out here, because it's a proven example of the fact that that resilience policies don't work, right? So let's come back to this 2018 like sort of era, right? You put out this kind of like need, and you hand out money and you hand out payouts to people in the tourism sector. What do they get? Okay, they're going to maybe try and build up a little bit of the thing. But at the end of the day, nothing is going to actually solve the fact that visitor numbers have been cut out and that there's not any funding coming in. Regardless of the fact of if they've been given help, if they've been given subsidies, nothing is going to happen at that point in time, which is why we kind of need to think about that true kind of overall idea of what would actually happen if we give people subsidies. Okay, so that's just the tourism sector as an example. Let's kind of move on to another sector. Let's move on to a tech sector, say. We're currently looking at like an AI sort of era where everything in tech is booming, and we're seeing this this information age where everyone is using this sort of technology. And it should be like really well known that this tech era is heavily dependent on the fact people purchasing technology, which is always growing, right? We've currently seen this huge spike in the use of AI. However, where is this going, right? It's the fact that if we were to try and make this industry quite resilient in case there was, say, an economic downturn, or we, say, entered an era where, like, under their model, there is an earthquake, right? Or we have the giant Alpine Fault earthquake, where all of a sudden the entire of South Island, or the majority of South Island hydro plants and stuff start to fail. That means we're not getting electricity to these sorts of parts. We're not getting electricity to Wellington, which means that we can't sort of build upon these tech systems that we've got, right? So how are you trying to build upon the tech system's reliance on the fact they're not getting electricity, right? So technically you could try and support the argument of like trying to give subsidies to the industry with regards to that, but we simply know that under economic policy, these effects don't actually match the understanding of where we're going with this, right? So let's come back to the broader impacts of this, right? We as the negating side have literally spoken about how the impacts are huge, right? The impacts of an efficiency policy on our economy are huge, right? We need to be thinking about how we can absolutely grow our efficiency under this model here, right? Efficiency, what does efficiency do, right? It builds up our economy and kind of like, it actually almost strengthens it, so we can kind of put that kind of Uno reverse strategy in here and truly understand, like, we are going to see benefits on both sides of the house here in terms of reducing prices and that sort of thing, right? So say after, like in the tech sector, we're getting all of this broad money that's being spent and pushed back into it. It means we're going to see all these positive benefits after the thing. I just want to come back to the COVID-19 pandemic, right, to 2020, right, when all of these subsidies were coming out. A local business, AGA Hackett Bungie, got $40 million, and they were very helpful for our community here. What meant is that after the thing, they were able to actually help people. They were able to keep people in jobs. They were able to keep people in jobs, which means that they were able to provide for their families. They were able to spend money on food. They were able to help themselves out of poverty in this instance. And this was a payout after the disaster had already happened. So we've proved, and currently I'd like it known that our economy, although the affirming side has tried to argue that we're in a bit of a downturn, technically we're not, because all the past 2 times we've been in kind of recession, we're actually climbing out the other side of this economic recession, because after COVID we've seen this absolute boom-bust model where we've boomed, we've busted, and now we're growing back up and we're building up that actual natural resilience of an economic cycle, not this sort of manufactured fake version of resilience that the affirming side has tried to put out here, right? So coming back to this kind of like boom-bust part of the pandemic, right? This sort of idea that after we saw all of this money come in subsidies, and subsidies was a great thing because we saw heaps of positive impacts from that. So simply put, right, we've proven that you can help a business out of all of these negative implications that the negating side has that the affirming side, that the affirming side has talked about. We've talked about how you can get all of these positive benefits coming out the other side of a disaster, all of this relief package, right? Oh, now say you try and argue that COVID-19, right, it meant that we had this huge overlying thing where we had to get money from overseas and all of that. Like, think Christchurch earthquake, right? Like, that was a relatively small earthquake on the natural scheme of how big earthquakes can get in New Zealand. We know within the next 50 to 100 years, we're expecting a big Alpine Fault earthquake, right? There is nothing we can do about that. It is simply in the natural cycle of Mother Nature that there will be an earthquake occurring. However, how can we build resilience up on this sort of system? Well, simply what the government could do is they could be very selective. And I'm just going to talk about selectability now for you here. Because it means that the industry and the government only has a certain amount of money. They're struggling now to even pay our teachers more. And the government is struggling to pay healthcare workers the correct pay. They're currently struggling to hand out fundraising towards universities and all of the like. So do you think they can actually put money aside and try and take loans from other people to put it back into our economy to try and build up this more resilience picture when we know in 50 years' time we're going to have an absolute detrimental impact on our society? I'll take a POI if you have one. No, that's all good. We'll just keep moving. So it's this kind of like cycle, right, that we've got this overall idea of these positive benefits that we've been able to see throughout this entire debate with selectability, right? So let's take selectability, for example. Government, who are they handing it out to? They literally can't pick, right? They tried to pick in the 70s with the Muldoon administration. Like, they tried to pick out this kind of wool industry. Sure, that worked, but that absolutely failed because although it brought wool prices up for a significant bit, as Natalie talked about, it actually detrimentally harmed the industry as a whole. And it caused a whole bunch of backlash, which negatively impacted not only the farmers, but it also impacted many other people as well. So, coming back to the whole selectability, right? Let's come back to the Alpine Fault earthquake real quick, and then I'll summarize real quick. So the whole Alpine Fault, we have to try and build a resilient economy and a resilient country as a whole for this thing. Simply by trying to hand out payouts to people now to try and build so-called resilience for this isn't going to help, because with an earthquake, we simply need to prepare our communities. We need to prepare them in the sort of social welfare we need. That is the sort of thing that the government is already doing, and it's not in the form of a resilient economy. This is more resilience as a whole, which means actually handing out money in the sort of scheme of things. So they're not actually giving money to specific businesses like the affirming side have argued, right? So technically, at the end of the day, efficiency should be prioritized over resilience simply because it is a superior method to actually building a more resilient economy. Thank you.
I welcome up the third speaker from the Affirmative.
I'm gonna be honest, this debate is like pretty confusing. I think both teams are kind of like saying the same thing at some points, and then like both teams have very different ideas of what this debate is talking about. That much is clear. So I just want to spend the first few minutes of my speech going over like what each team has actually told you that we're arguing for, and then I want to go into like some points of rebuttal on like tourism and like the different sectors that we see, and then like just about everything else. Honestly, I was pretty confused, so it's just kind of mixed up. So firstly, on like what does each team think this is? So we told you at the start that efficiency looks like putting money into businesses in order to improve the efficiency of businesses, right? So this looks like putting money into businesses to improve the outflow of businesses, putting money into the economy in order to actually make more products and make it easier and cheaper in order to make these products. What does resilience look like on our side? It looks like putting money aside, firstly to actually improve like self-sufficiency, like making like
POI.
supporting more businesses in New Zealand, and secondly to like actually put money aside in a bank so we can offer more subsidies to people. What we heard from the negating side is kind of like on the resilience model, we're going to freeze all of the prices in New Zealand and like just use a kind of seesaw in order to balance these prices. The framing at first didn't really make sense to us, and we were talking on the bench, we couldn't figure it out. So I don't think this is actually like an actually good model for the resilience there. And what we actually see, like all the stuff we heard about resiliency actually taking more spending, I'll get on to later, but that didn't like actually make sense. Okay, so onto stuff about like the different sectors. At first, we talked about COVID-19 as an example. Theo pointed out that this was only an example, right? And we heard a lot about this, but I'll talk about it anyway. Firstly, like, tourism is a big part of the New Zealand economy, but under our side, if we use the resiliency model, we can actually help people in order to, like, if their businesses are struggling, as we told you at UNA, if their businesses can't open because they're shut, because they have, like, physical leaks which they can't repair, because they don't have the money to do so in economic crises, we actually support them with subsidies. We support them with, like, people who can actually build their businesses again. So, like, we've kind of just responded to this as like, we've heard some responses to this like people just won't be spending money. This is exactly what you told you. This is exactly how we solve that, right? Secondly, we heard some stuff about like tech support and if there's like an earthquake about like AI and all that. Firstly, like resiliency does offer aid. If there is an earthquake, we can send money, we can send people, whereas on the efficiency model, we don't have as much of that. We don't have as much people who can actually go and support those. We don't have as much in reserves in order to help the individual. We can't, on the efficiency, if we have big economic crises and we have like a giant earthquake, we're going to rely on aid from other countries. As we told you at UNA, it's probably not going to be as effective if we keep saying, oh, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources, we need all of the support from our allies. That's not going to work in the long term if we just say, we can't offer you any support, but we're just going to take and take and take. Like, we told you at UNA, and this is purely responsive material here, like, this doesn't actually work in like terms with the allies that we have, and this probably isn't going to make our relationships with them any better. What else did we hear in this debate? I'm going to talk about like how we heard resiliency improves spending. So like, firstly, anything involves spending, right? Like on either side of the house, there's going to be a lot of spending. Secondly, I think what we're trying to say in this debate is that we're kind of using the same amount of money, but we're just directing it into different places, right? So I don't think it's fair in order to say that resiliency involves like more spending than the other side of the house, because it's probably the same. The difference is where the money goes, what that money goes to, and like how that actually changes the economy in New Zealand and what that's used for. So I think that kind of like falls out of today's debate entirely, right? Because it's absolutely unfair to say like we're using more taxes, we're making somebody pay more money to the government just to make more banana farms or something, I don't know. But like it's not actually feasible for people to pay more money just to go like build banana farms. Secondly, we heard like it's a seesaw and like we spend money in order to keep things in balance. Like I don't really get how this works because we're not actually fixing prices on things. We're trying to help New Zealand become like kind of more self-sufficient, and like we're trying to help people and small businesses actually improve. We're trying to help our farms grow and all that sort of stuff. We don't actually mean like bananas cost $3, we'll keep them at $3. That is not what we're doing. That is like what I heard from the first speech, and that did not make sense either. It's not something that we're doing on our side of the house. Cool. So lastly, on like some stuff on like struggling to pay teachers, we heard this at second, and like firstly, I think everyone pays teachers. The thing is, the government has the same amount of money on both sides. The teachers are like protesting in order to get money. The difference is like it's probably not going to come from like the economy bracket, right? You've probably got a different bracket for education entirely, so this doesn't actually work. Like the bit where you're paying construction workers, you're paying teachers, you're paying all those people, it's probably very different from like the bit you're investing into the economy, the bit you're investing into businesses, or like growing food. It's probably all very, very different. I will take a POI before I move on.
How are you guys handling the fact that the government isn't made of money?
Well, I think the government does get money from the people. The government is not made of money, but it's how the government distributes money, which is actually in dispute in today's debate. So it doesn't really matter that the government isn't made of money. It matters what the government does with the money it actually gets, right? So I'm just going to go over a bit of stuff from Yene. We heard about like businesses. Okay, I'm going to go over that and like expand a little bit. So what we heard at Yene was that small businesses get more money, they can support themselves. We actually see a growing economy because we have these people who can support themselves, who can grow their businesses, right? This wasn't something that was like really interacted with in today's debate, so I'm going to bring it up again. This is really important because it means that the people who may not be able to get income on the negative side of the house because these shops are closing, this means that these people can survive, they can put food on their plate. That is what's important in today's debate, because on the negating side, as we said at first, only the wealthy benefit because their production, their farms are getting bigger. On our side of the house, we support all people, like in New Zealand, who want to grow their businesses. We support an economy. Our economy is actually growing, and that is super important in today's debate because this is an economy debate, right? Lastly, I just want to like weigh our worst case scenario. So our worst case scenario on our side of the house is like having money in the bank and our economy probably not growing very much, like while our money's just sitting in the bank. Whereas for them, we have an economic crisis, like if we respond to an economic crisis, we're going to have the stuff. We're probably not going to have loads of people dying from an earthquake because we have responses. For them, they're going to say like, everything's cheaper. Great. What does that do for an earthquake? Like, we didn't really hear anything about that. We just said it's like not going to happen, like, right? So what have I done to you on my speech today? Firstly, the average person is so important. Weigh this heavily. We help the average person. We help the economy. This is so important in today's debate. Stand for the average person in New Zealand.
I thank the speaker for their speech. And I now welcome up the third speaker from the meeting.
In the trough of the Great Depression, the British economist John Maynard Keynes would make the lofty claim that in the long run, civilization is eventually all dead, and the long run effects of economic policy have no or very little implication. And this is the exact argument here, folks, we have seen across the side of the debate from the other team, when we win on the principle and the pushes of our paths to victory of efficiency. One, because I want to correct throughout my speech the clash point on what efficiency actually is, briefly by defining this efficiency rather as a process, an economic process, without using like a graphical measure of just like demonstrating how efficiency actually is as a process which is being misconstrued as a government policy. Efficiency is not a government policy. I'll acknowledge more on that later. And secondly, a number of minor, this has been scattered with misconceptions, partly across the floor from both teams. I'd like to clarify in this speech on why, truthfully, the policies of the negative team have way more in this debate and how they contribute to better economic outcomes for each individual involved. Firstly, their policies, how can we acknowledge these as legitimate policies when these are not actually in policies designed to improve efficiency? They're in policies designed to affect it. Yes, I'll take the POI briefly.
Is the real poor economic policy capitalism?
Capitalism is not a poor economic policy, because without capitalism you'd have no economic policy. When the Berlin Wall fell, what side did people run to? And I tell you what, if you look at a map, where were the lights being kept on? You want to bring up socialism now, you should have done that at first speaker, because that argument would have been decimated like the desolation of smog. I can tell you, if I thought the opposing team's argument couldn't be more irrelevant here today. They decided to bring up Marxism. I can't believe it, folks, I can't believe it. But moreover, I'd like to actually focus this debate and ground it in real seriousness. What does resiliency policy look like? What does it look like characterised in like a Western mindset in like developed economies? We think, like from what the info slide characterises us, but also experience tells us, we think it's things like subsidising research and development spending in order to say, if you're, for example, increasing the teat size of cows in order to generate greater milk production and milk solids to enhance industry's future-proofing viability. Their examples have been faulty at best in terms of what defining a future-proofing policy actually is. It seems like their policies seem to be on the basis, the moral basis of teaching a man giving a man a fish versus our argument really of the process of efficiency of teaching a man how to fish, and the fact that they provide short-term unsustainable arguments, which isn't what an resiliency policy even is. And because of this classic mischaracterisation, we win this debate simply on this point, even if they prove that the efficiency mechanism fails, on which we've provided sound economic evidence of why it does not. No, thank you. I'd like to clarify some minor aspects before I go into the significant. They have contributed that something like increasing payouts to beneficiaries is a resiliency policy, when really this looks like more of an escape policy to try and fluctuate like aggregate demand levels by increasing like consumer spending within various sectors. We believe this is more of a bailout policy that we've seen in more of our response mechanism as like a temporary measure to increase economic stimulus, which we believe is valid, but we don't believe it actually characterises what an efficiency policy is. They haven't mentioned anything on the policy of trade. They haven't mischaracterised our argument on comparative advantages completely, and why the idea of comparative advantage increases competitiveness, and why even in these big, like large-scale, once-in-a-lifetime events, a lot of these have been large, like geographic events, not even like economic events. Like they haven't considered the idea of something like that is outside of like they've considered things outside an economic realm, such as COVID-19, such as even like geographic implications. We see these implications are going to occur anyway. COVID-19 as an illness is still going to be spread, contracted, have resulted in deaths. Earthquakes still going to occur, tsunamis still going to occur. All of these resultant effects are going to occur, but that by paying out people after the damage is done, they are not proving resiliency. Moreover, they're rather pressuring, no thank you, the effects of what they're trying to classify our argument as. And this is why we believe singularly we win just on this point. Now I'd like to clarify some other misconstrued points. One point is that the small business contributes more to the New Zealand economy on a national scale than big businesses or large financial institutions or corporations, without even considering they've completely ignored the interrelated and interdependent nature of these firms. But for example, a low wage dairy farm assistant in Southland is still going to benefit of large efficiency increases, which result in like for example, an appreciation in foreign milk solids prices, simply because the resultant effects flow down from large corporations and large institutions. For example, even in this instance, like a higher Fonterra payout results in farmers across the country collectively receiving more income, which results in these workers, even at a small scale, or smaller businesses like individual dairy farms, receiving greater payouts simply on the basis that that larger corporations, where do you think smaller corporations actually profit from? The average, like a small hand-knitted wool store is not going to profit, is not dry, is simply, I can ignore that as erroneous, because even when you consider the scale of it, that can simply not be driving the highly industrialised economy we see in New Zealand today. And we believe, despite it may not be a pretty reality, it may not be a sunset fairy tale ending, but we believe it's the reality of how things are today, and the importance of these large firms stands on our side of the house, and we believe it contributes to efficiency, because we believe an efficient model looks like increased competition. It doesn't look like increased monopolisation. It looks like, if it's an efficiency implemented policy, which even if we want to consider it as a policy, which it usually is not as construed as, even if we want that, looks like increasing regulations to improve competition, such as increasing... yes, I'll take one.
You talk about how it's like giving a man a fish instead of teaching him how to fish. Wouldn't you give a man a fish if he's starving?
That is completely ignorant to the point of this debate. Sure, you could give... Your model has talked about only continuously providing people short-term payouts and subsidies in order to increase production purely on the basis of fairness, which we don't believe, and when we weigh this, the short-term equity provided in this outweighs the economic process of efficiency, and we define efficiency, we define it as like the characteristics of perfect market information between consumers and producers, which looks like an increase in profitability, which looks like a greater increase in demand for labour, which means higher wage rates, which then spill over to the groups they're trying to impact. We impact these groups more because something like an efficient model, which results in the most efficient possible allocation of marginal revenue and consumer welfare for individuals. This looks like individuals receiving an optimal amount of goods and services, not an excess amount such as what occurred in the wool price subsidy scheme of the 1970s, but also not deconstructing the supply such as the oil shock of 1973. And this is why, in these cases, we believe it's the perfect allocation, even perfect theoretical allocation of resources, which will in turn result in greater productive capacity, as this naturally results in greater real GDP output, which results and a greater increase in the employment level of current resources, as it provides a greater advantage to achieve this process, which will therefore result in more future-proofing policy, which occurs naturally, rather than the misconstrued argument they're promoting through government incentives, whereby effectively they are trying to pick winners and losers in industries. This is what they're attempting to do here. They're trying to fund that the government in their side of the house is some magical genie who can perfectly predict what industry is going to succeed. Look, folks, that's a great idea, and if you know this person, please contact them. It'll be great on my Binance account, but simply, this is not a realistic principle. This idea that the governments can somehow naturally pick, even with evidenced economists, at times the worst predictors that we have, and this is why we believe we're presented a sound economic argument which has defeated the claims of the opposing team. Thank you, everyone.
I need that note. That's so bad. I love this.
There's so many
Alright, yellow everyone, I'm sure we're all in peals of laughter, but I'd like to prove that their case is completely bananas. They've been monkeying around and this is not making any sense. So first of all, I'm going to go over how, I'm going to compare the two cases that are being put forward at the main clash points, reiterate why our case is definitely the best course of action, and conclude our side of the debate. Okay. So there's kind of been two main things going back and forth. The first part is about disasters. We've seen from the Affirmative team that you need to be insulated against economic shock or a natural disaster, something like this, and that disasters are inevitable. We agree, disasters are inevitable. However, how they're going to try and avoid suffering from disasters, it's not well mechanised. You can't justify the amount of government spending this is going to take to keep up and to try and avoid these disasters from happening. And often it's not even going to work, these disasters. You can't keep on handing out benefits forever. and yeah, I'll go more into the government spending soon. And also, we've said that economic shock, we've noticed that it's unavoidable, unfixable, and part of any good economy. There's always going to be rises and falls, and different people benefit from different parts, and that's part of how a good economy works, as we've shown. Not only that, we're actually going to have more money in the pot for a disaster, because the second part of clash of this debate is what actually is efficiency and reliability. We've heard from the Affirmative team that efficiency is putting money into businesses to make things cheaper. We've heard that resiliency is putting money aside to save up for things. However, I'd like to refer back to the moot and the info slide. Taking this from the info slide, efficiency is encouraging competition and removing barriers. And when we think about that, that doesn't actually require government spending. It's an economic policy of what to do, and it's not about the government trying to put money into things. Whereas on the affirmative side of the house, with resiliency, the moot is talking about putting money into stuff. For instance, subsidizing domestic production to try and improve things. They're basically trying to manipulate the market. This is costly, and also we've been wondering about the mechanisation, about how we're putting in, like how we're distributing $2 billion into, for example, into the market to prepare for any kind of economic problem. So I'd like to just go over our case. First of all, why there's positive benefits to an efficiency policy. Because the efficiency policy, it allows the economic world of New Zealand to naturally correct itself. It has short-term cycles which help people. It encourages competition, which, as we've already said, leads to lowering prices, innovation, enterprise, people having more money because they have to spend less money on stuff, the government not having to raise taxes, so overall consumers are having to spend less, and we've shown you again and again there's just benefits coming out of our ears on this side of the house. Whereas with resiliency, trying to manipulate the market, freezing things was just an example, but creating this artificial market that only works for a short period of time involves heaps of government spending, and involves them having to increase taxes so they've got the money to do this. And this is going to lead to inflation, and it's further going to take away from the money that the people have, and they're not going to be able to afford the basic things they need. So basically the two main stakeholders being put forward in this case, the producers and the consumers, they're going to be better off on the negating side of the house, but they're going to have less money to spend on the affirmative side. And anyway, even if our case doesn't work, at least we're not putting all of our pens into plastic bags with reckless abandon from the environment in case they leak everywhere. Proud to stand.
Thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the affirmative flag to close this debate.
I have some notes. Okay, so what are some of the main points of clash? We identified two. What helps the economy in the long run, and which side helps the economy in the long run. But then we also sort of won that point of the boom-bust economy. Just a couple of sort of points on the government spending, which I think Rachel pointed out really well in her third speech. The side negating was like kept pushing this idea that like under our side for some reason you're going to have this immense like amount of extra governmental spending, but I think she like responded to this really well when she said the difference isn't actually how much the government is being spent, but it is spending, but it would be where they're allocating this money to, right? So what are they spending the money on? So as we identified at the start, we had the unique advantage of being able to help these smaller actors because of things like subsidies, which I do think actually side negating kind of helped us prove this point when they used that example of the tourism industry in their local town, and how when COVID-19 hit, they got subsidies from the government, like something like $40 million, and how hugely this actually benefited the business. They never went on to sort of compare how it works with their model, because I'm pretty sure that's like our model, right? So that was a government subsidy, and they proved that these things do help. They do help keep these businesses at least open until that economic rough period has passed, right? Going on to like what helps the economy in the long run. We are still talking about these smaller actors, and I do think that our side has the unique benefit of helping these smaller actors who are the ones who are still spending in society, right? And they are the ones who are keeping the economy afloat. So when they're getting the subsidization from the government, which we get to do because we're about I can't remember the word. Because we're about like protecting the future and stuff, and future proofing. We're helping these individuals, so we're actually able to help benefit the economy, right? Then onto like the boom bust portion of the boom bust economy. I think Theo pointed out that we're like kind of getting rid of that bust portion of the economy, which means like we're gonna have less homelessness, less food insecurity, and less debt, because of yet again that governmental support, which the government is a huge actor in the economy. And I feel like that was like not actually addressed properly by side negating. We can see that, you know, when their side's good, it's good. However, when it's bad, it's really, really, really bad, and it's really harmful towards those smaller actors who we're trying to protect. Our path to victory was how we protect the working class, and I just don't think we really got a lot of engagement from their side on like how we achieve a unique harm towards this group, or how they achieve a unique benefit to the working class. Stand side affirming.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and everyone for a great debate. I think we all learned a lot about bananas. And now I invite you guys to cross the floor and shake hands, and we'll head outside.
And noting also, so this round's a silent round, so we won't find out the result or receive an LA immediately afterwards. So you guys are good to go from here, and then at the once you announce, like done the break announcement and things, feel free to come find me and we can be on.
Anybody want food?
Thank you very much.